No pardons would be accepted. But we know Israel didn't do this because they corrupted themselves. Destroy what must be destroyed. That's the point of the matter. All too often, people compromise their set apartness by what their eyes see. And they pardon away crookedness, possibly for sake of keeping peace or think they're keeping peace. Yet we know the word commands us to show no partiality in right ruling. Do not pardon sin. We are to walk by belief and not by sight. This is very important for us to recognize. Yeshayahu 11 verse 3-4 says, and shall make him breathe in the fear of Yahweh, and he shall not judge by the sight of his eyes, nor decide by the hearing of his ears, but with righteousness he shall judge the poor, and shall decide with straightness for the meek ones on the earth, and shall smite the earth with the rod of his mouth, and slay the wrong with the breath of his lips. Yeshua will not judge by the sight of his eyes. He judges by the righteous right ruling of his word, and that is what he's calling us to do. When we operate a clear standard of what is right and what is wrong, we don't determine that by what we see. We determine it by what we know from his word as clear instructions for set apartness. This doesn't mean that we are to be mean, but rather it's calling us to be firm. There's a difference. We cannot overlook and wink at lawlessness and pretend that we don't see it. So don't tell me those things when you already know it. You know what I'm saying? Our eyes shall not pardon and give the impression that their lawless ways are acceptable. Now, this is in Colossians when we understand, don't let those outside judge you about what you do, the feasts, about the Sabbaths, about what you eat, but the body of Messiah. We are to be responsible for one another in the body. Now, when we are taking a stand on the truth and what we don't accept as a standard of living, it will cause division, even among families. Our master said it very clear, households will get divided. It can be a very painful process when you're being firm in the word. It can be heartbreaking. And many a time people find it so heartbreaking that they, in today's expression, turn a blind eye and try not to think of what they know they should be standing and confronting the evil, but yet they kind of just try and ignore it. And this is reminding us, if you do that, it's actually going to overtake you. And in verse 18, it tells us, do not be afraid of them. When you say in your heart, sometimes people often get afraid of standing firm because they're afraid of how more powerful they think others that they know are doing wrong. They're more powerful than them. And how can I tell somebody that they're doing wrong? Or how can I take a stand and say, I'm not going to join with you? And here it says, don't be afraid of them. The same words, you see, Yahweh doesn't show partiality. So when he gives belief-equipping words to Yirmiyahu, where don't break down before them lest I break you, it's the same words of equipping that he gives us as his body. To speak his word, be bold, be strong. We sang the song, be brave, Remember well what Yahweh Elohim, your Elohim, did to Pharaoh and to all Mitzrayim. This is very important to us, because often when we find ourselves in a position where it's like, how do I take this stand? Remember the word remember. Now, the phrase remember well is written in Hebrew as zachar tizkar, and it's a repetition of the root word zachar. So basically it's saying remember to remember. Now, remembrance is a theme right through the cycle of feasts of our Master. When we have the Pesach meal that begins the cyclical feasts, and we remember our Master's death on a stake, which has given us entrance by his resurrection through his blood into a covenant that we were once not part of. And Shaul reminds us in 1 Corinthians 11 that as often as you do this, you proclaim the death of our Master. When our Master, on the evening he was betrayed, he took bread, he broke it, and he gave thanks, and he says, eat, this is my body, do this in remembrance of me. And he took the cup in the same way, and he says, do this in remembrance of me. Now, this is very important for us to understand, because we are to remember the work of our Master. And this remembrance instruction given in regards to the Passover meal is once a year, where we partake in the body and the blood of our Master in remembering his death. This is not a regular, whenever you feel like, communion command, as many have twisted to their own destruction. It's very clear that the people get misled by as often as you do this. And what the context of the chapter in that letter to the Corinthians is a clear picture of, in as often as you keep the feast and the table of our master, and you have this remembrance meal, once a year we proclaim the death. Because as often as you do this, you're proclaiming his death. It's only once a year we're remembering the death of the Lamb as a remembrance of the life that we have in him that we should proclaim every day of our lives. And so we come to Shavuot, and we are to remember that we were slaves in Mitzrayim, because we remember what we've been cleansed from and who we are now as a set-apart bride. When we come all the way to Yom Teruah, we have a remembrance of Teruah, a remembrance of shouting, so that we remind ourselves that we're in a marriage covenant, and we shouldn't be like the foolish maidens that have no oil, as representative of not walking in the commands, not walking according to the Spirit. And so then we understand a clear witness as we get to Shavuot. We are to remember that we are to dwell in booths, we are to have a remembrance of shouting, we are to remember that we've been delivered from destruction, and we are to remind ourselves that we are to be a people that are waiting for our Master's soon return. This theme of remembering is consistent in a walk of obedience in our Master. And it begins with reminding us what Yahweh has done for us. And so we need to be a people who can remember well what he's done and remember to remember. So when you remember to remember, it means you do not forget, which is a very important lesson that we're going to look at after lunch when we look at Yeshayahu. Because we must not be a people that forget Elohim. We are to be a people that are always remembering to remember. Does that make sense? Now, it talks in 19, remember the great trials and the signs and the wonders, the outstretched arm. So we remember even from the historical accounts that we're given in Scripture, but in our own lives as well. We also all have a personal witness of a remembrance of what Yahweh's done for us. And we must never forget that, because we don't go back into a pity party of sorts of how bad we were. Yes, we are ashamed of what we did in wrongdoing and falling short, but we remember what we've been redeemed from. So we remind ourselves to be on guard, to not be stripped of the righteousness that he's clothed us with, and not cause it to be defiled in any way. And Yahweh says, don't be afraid of the nations that you need to destroy. I'm going to send the hornets, Now, he says, I'm going to send the hornets among them until those who are left, who hide themselves from you, are destroyed. Now, the Hebrew word for hornets is tzirah, and it comes from the same root word as the word tzara'ath, which is leprosy, which is derived from tzara, which means to be struck with leprosy or to be leprous. Now, it's possible the word hornet comes from tzara, because we understand that when a hornet stings you, it leaves a mark on your flesh. Hornets can also represent that which brings to surface any evil that's hidden in the dark. Now, Yahweh says, do not be afraid. Again, the command of not being afraid is highlighted here by Moshe, because Yahweh is in our midst and we should be living like it. There's a twofold meaning that I see going on here. And we can see, firstly, we are not to be afraid of those nations who are greater and stronger than us, because it's Yahweh who fights for us. While at the same time, we also see this is an encouragement to us to not be afraid of the hornets that Yahweh sends, because Yahweh is sending upon them even those who are hiding themselves in the caves until they're destroyed. Now, why I say this, because we see a similar picture of Yahweh's judgment being poured out upon those who refuse to repent in Chazon 9, where we're given this picture of the locusts that come upon the earth and are given authority to harm men for 5 months. The locusts are commanded not to harm the grass of the field, nor any green matter or tree, but only those men who do not have the seal of Elohim upon their foreheads. In other words, the ones who are sealed need not fear the locusts of Chazon 9. And it's a similar picture that we see of Yahweh sending the hornets here in Devarim that we're reading here. And these hornets are sent to destroy the nations who are hiding themselves from Yahweh. In other words, they're not repenting and coming into covenant. We must not fear man, no matter how bigger they might seem to be than we are. Our master said, do not fear those who kill the body, but are unable to kill the being. but rather fear him who is able to destroy both the being and the body in Gehenna. And so we need to understand this wonderful presence that our Master is saying, the resulting action of obedience. Look you're going to see things, and Yahweh's going to destroy people that are not in him before you. He's going to bring them before you and cause you to put them under the ban and destroy them so they have no effect on your life, so that you always serve him alone. But he's going to do it little by little. In other words, I love Yahweh's compassion on his people. He says here, you know, you're not going to drive them out all at once, because then the beasts of the land are going to devour you. In other words, Yahweh shows, listen, it's going to be a process. He drive out the enemy little by little, rather than all at once. You know, this doesn't mean, this is a clear witness, don't then let the enemy have control over you. Take your ground. Stand your ground. If the enemy had been driven out all at once, Yahweh says the beasts of the field would become too much for them to handle. And you know what? Israel had to learn some new skills. They had to learn how to farm. They had to learn how to work the land. So if all the beasts came on the land, how would they, you know? So it shows Yahweh is very precise in knowing what we can handle. Just because things around us aren't just obliterated doesn't mean we cannot handle ourselves in being set apart and taking our stand. In fact, that's what we are commanded to do. It's a wonderful picture of how patient Yahweh is with us when we get delivered from bondage and delivered from the things that enslaved us under the dogmas of corrupted man's ways. And there are certainly things that we are to stop immediately. We learn more and more from his Torah, and as we learn in his Torah, things surface, like dross, you know, coming to surface of that which is put in the fire so that it can be scraped out, like by the refiner. So therefore, we also learn that there are things, as we learn, things come up, and we're able to get them out of our lives so they have no effect on our lives. In fact, we see in Acts 15 a similar principle that was given to the nations that were seeking to be part of Yahweh's bride, grafted into Israel, and they were instructed the following in Acts 15, verse 20 to 21. It says, "Write to them to abstain from the defilements of idols, from whoring, from that which is strangled, from blood. For from ancient generations Moshe has in every city those proclaiming him, being read in the congregations every Sabbath." I really think that a lot of people don't have ears to hear this critical component of a body being built correctly as an instruction given to those coming into covenant. The four things that they were to stop immediately: idol worship, whoring, eating strangled animals, and drinking or eating blood. All of these were pagan worship rite practices to their mighty ones, their false mighty ones. They were told to stop these immediately and learn how to be set apart by going every Sabbath where Moshe is read. Once again, we could see this today being a living word to tell people that we know in our culture and of upbringing in the world today. Most of us have come out from some kind of twisted biblical foundation that wasn't on the rock. Stop idol worship. Stop keeping Christmas and Easter. Stop Sunday worship. Stop eating pork. Stop eating shellfish. Stop using false titles and names. That would be a good start for anybody coming on this walk. But then how am I supposed to walk? Come every week where Moshe is read, and you will learn the rest. And when you go every week to somewhere where Moshe is not being read anymore, let that be a red flag. Especially if the person that's leading you is calling himself Rabbi. You know, so in verse 23, we can learn and see that as we walk in the truth, Yahweh will deliver over to us those things that need to be driven out of our lives. So he'll bring to surface what he knows we can now deal with and get out. But what he deals with straight away is corrupt worship. Stop the false worship, because you can't come out and still think, oh, but I can do this and can't do that. We need to learn from the pattern. There are things regarding worship standard that must be stopped immediately. Then learning to live a new life of worshiping in spirit and truth will be made clear and taught to you every Shabbat. And so we understand that these words are encouraging words, and words that remind us of the importance of not neglecting the gathering of the set-apart ones, to hear what Moshe is saying so that we can make sure that we are not allowing those things that need to be destroyed in our lives to actually destroy us because we don't deal with them as we should. And that's what happens when people rather seek ear ticklers, because they're not dealing with the issues, turning a blind eye. Oh, it doesn't matter. Oh, Yahweh will understand because I have to break the Sabbath, or Yahweh will understand because, no. You don't understand how just our Elohim is. Verse 24 is another great encouragement that reminds us in Messiah, we are more than overcomers, And when we look at this, when he says, he'll give their sovereigns into your hand, you shall destroy their name from under the heavens. No one is going to able to stand against you until you have destroyed them. So when we realize that we are going to destroy their name from under the heavens, we also realize those things that were in corruption, we are not going to allow those adopted names to still be part of our lives as in thinking we can attribute those things to Yahweh. Because coming out of corrupt worship means restoring a proper clean lip and who it is that we serve. So while I mentioned, in one sense, many on the Torah walk today that are listening to those calling themselves Rabbi, that's one aspect. Then there are others might say, oh no, they're not calling them Rabbi, but they're still allowing the mixing of titles and false names to be acceptable. That's not set apart behavior, that's mixing. And that's not something Yahweh tolerates. Verse 25 to 26 is very clear. Keep your house clean, both individually and corporately, if you want to call it like that. Destroy any form or image of idol worship. And the reason we're commanded to burn idols was to keep anyone from going after them in order to seek the silver and gold that was on them. When we look at this today, we can understand the words of Yaakov when it says in Yaakov or James 1 verse 27, clean and undefiled religion before Elohim and before the Elohim and Father is this, to visit orphans and widows in their affliction, and to keep oneself unstained from the world. We are to keep our garments clean. Running after worldly wealth and riches and coveting that which the world has to offer will defile you. And it will cause you to end up worshipping the idols of the nations. And those idols can come in many shapes and forms. We must understand that there are many idols and images of idols and things that are crafted today and are given to people as gifts. And this is how the enemy also infiltrates the houses of many. We are to be careful what we allow into our homes. Verse 26 is very clear. Don't allow an abomination into your house. We are to loathe it. We are to hate it. Now, there may be statues, images, artifacts of people that people have in their home. They might have obtained it as a gift or an heirloom or whatever it may be, and often they attach sentimental value to these very earthly things. And in the eyes of Yahweh, they are clearly abominable objects. And at its root are forms of pagan idolatry, which Yahweh doesn't want in our homes. When people realize this, they think that selling them cleans their house. Yet this is simply an expression of covering it with silver and gold. So you think, okay, so I don't need this Buddha anymore. I'm just using an example. Okay, so I'll go and sell it to somebody who likes Buddhas. No. That's not, you're just now covering it with silver and gold and getting something for it. We talked about reward and because. We are to destroy those things that should not be able to be used in worship again. No matter how expensive or precious it may have been, in the eyes of families, previous generations, or whatever it may be. Cleaning our house of everything that's defiled is actually a necessity. It's a necessary exercise, vitally important for the entire body of Israel to take heed of when we get this clear instruction. This will include getting rid of books, video games. I don't even know if it's called videos anymore. People today in this day and age, what's a video? Video games, anything that's attached to witchcraft, magic, even Freemasonry, if you will. And we've got a scriptural account that gives us a nice example of how urgent the people were in getting the junk out of their homes. In Acts 19, verse 18 to 19, we're told of how the people brought books and burned them. After confessing their sins and cleaning up their lives, it says, many who had believed came confessing, declaring their deeds, and many of those who had practiced magic brought their books together, burning them before all, and they reckoned up the value of them and found it to be 50,000 pieces of silver. Now, we must put this into perspective. I mean, there might have been a lot of people that came, yes, but there was a big burning going on. A day's wages for one person in those days was a piece of silver, and the value of these books was 50,000 pieces of silver. And if one calculates that into daily wage, you can really see that this was an equivalent of being somebody's wages for over 150 years. In other words, it's what they burnt was worth more than one person's lifetime earnings. Now, as I said, a lot of people could be bringing it, but I want to highlight the practicality here, is that a lot of people bringing out what needed to be burned because they understood the good news of the Master. Today, many have a number of materials, books, if it will be, that are actually abominable in the eyes of Yahweh. Yet they're unwilling to burn them because they have emotional value or they paid so much for it. How can you know? We must follow the example of Acts 19, the belief that these new believers had in saying, this zeal to get the house clean. When our Master, with that zeal, burned and turned the money changers' tables, that's the kind of zeal, the Pinchas zeal that puts to death whoring. That's what needs to be revived in the body of Messiah. A lot of people today are unable to, they say, give up that which is supposed to be destroyed. And our Master made it clear, anyone who does not give up all that he has is unable to be my taught one. That doesn't mean we must get rid of everything. We know what we're talking about here, immaturity. And I've always used a basic test to say, if in doubt, chuck it out because it's just stuff. We mustn't covet what others have, seek after things of the world that can enslave us. We are to keep our house clean. Our Master gave a parable about the man, an unclean spirit, when it goes out of a man, goes through dry places seeking rest, it finds none, and he says, I want to return to my house from which I came. And when he comes, he finds it all swept and decorated. Then he goes and takes with him 7 other spirits, more wicked than himself, and they enter and dwell there, and the last state of the man becomes worse than the first. This is a parable he gave, because many come to the truth, they get quickly cleaned up, and then they start allowing, their newly decorated house, they start allowing abominable things to come in. Keep your house clean. In verse 26, we're told to not bring any abominable thing into our house, lest we be accursed like it. And this is the way that we are to guard ourselves by utterly loathing and utterly hating that which should not be in our lives. Now, the Hebrew word utterly loathe comes from the root word shakatz. And shakatz, as its root, is written twice in a row, but it's written as shaketz to shaktzenu, which means to utterly hate and loathe. It's like expressive here. Now, we are to abominate or to see as abominable, and one example of just touching on this, that which is in the seas that does not have both fins and scales. Because if we are the dwelling place, again, it's about putting into the dwelling place, even what we eat. So we learn a vital lesson, why we should adhere to the clear dietary laws of our Master, the house laws of our Master. Those that don't have fins and scales have a job to do, but they are to be an abomination to us. Don't bring them into your home. And utterly hate means utterly hate. Because when you don't hate something, you might actually be attracted to it. The instruction is clear. That which is not allowed, don't have it in your home. That which is under the ban and abominable in Yahweh's eyes must be abominable in our eyes too. What stuff, when we go through this Torah portion, the mirror of the word, maybe we should ask ourselves, what stuff have we allowed in our homes, in our lives? Now, that can also be stuff that's not physical. It can be things that we allow to drive our motives in hobbies and things like that, creating idols in our hearts that we should be utterly loathing, but rather are we chasing after them? We are to keep our house clean. And Yahweh gives us a clear standard for set apartness on how to do that. Amen? Because. What side of because are you on? Let's go to chapter 8. Okay.
You are to do every command which I command you today, that you might live and shall increase and go in and shall possess the land of which Yahweh swore to your fathers. And you shall remember that Yahweh your Elohim led you all the way these 40 years in the wilderness, to humble you, to prove you, to know what is in your heart, whether you guard his commands or not. And he humbled you and let you suffer hunger, and fed you with manna which you did not know, nor did your fathers know, to make you know that man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of Yahweh. Your garments did not wear out on you, nor did your foot swell these 40 years. Thus you shall know in your heart that as a man disciplines his son, so Yahweh your Elohim disciplines you. Therefore you shall guard the commands of Yahweh your Elohim, to walk in his ways and to fear him. For Yahweh your Elohim is bringing you into a good land, a land of streams of water, of fountains and springs that flow out of valleys and hills, a land of wheat and barley, of vines and fig trees and pomegranates, a land of olive oil and honey, a land in which you eat bread without scarcity, in which you do not lack at all, a land whose stones are iron, and out of whose hills you dig copper. And you shall eat and be satisfied, and shall bless Yahweh your Elohim for the good land which he has given you. Be on guard, lest you forget Yahweh your Elohim by not guarding his commands, and his right rulings, and his laws which I command you today. Lest you eat and shall be satisfied, and build lovely houses and shall dwell in them, and your herds and your flocks increase, and your silver and your gold are increased, and all that you have is increased. That your heart then becomes lifted up, and you forget Yahweh your Elohim, who brought you out of the land of Mitzrayim from the house of bondage, who led you through that great and awesome wilderness, fiery serpents and scorpions and thirst, where there was no water, who brought water for you out of the flinty rock, who fed you in the wilderness with manna, which your fathers did not know, in order to humble you and to try you, to do you good in the end. You then shall say in your heart, my power and the strength of my hand have made for me this wealth. But you shall remember Yahweh your Elohim, for it is he who gives you power to get wealth, in order to establish his covenant which he swore to your fathers, as it is today. And it shall be, if you by any means forget Yahweh your Elohim, and follow other mighty ones, and serve them and bow yourselves to them, I have warned you this day that you shall certainly perish. Like the nations which Yahweh is destroying before you, so you are to perish, because you did not obey the voice of Yahweh your Elohim.
Okay, so this chapter is primarily a warning against pride and the spirit of independence. After being warned to get rid of all idols in the house, they were also warned against falling into pride and forgetting Yahweh, especially after they would enjoy the benefits of the fruitfulness of the land. Moshe is very clear: guard to do every command so that you live and increase and possess. Remember that you were led through the wilderness by Yahweh to humble you, to prove you, to see if you'll actually guard his commands or not. We are told in Yaakov 4 verse 6, he gives greater favor. Because of this, he says, Elohim resists the proud, but gives favor to the humble. Humble yourselves in the sight of the master, and he shall lift you up. Kephah Aleph 5 verse 6 says, humble yourselves then under the mighty hand of Elohim, so that he exalts you in due time. We need a wilderness journey where we learn to hear the voice of our master, to understand what it means to be humble before him and put our total reliance upon him. The Torah has a great effect in destroying form of pride and hardness of heart as long as we submit to it. A lot of people want to skip the wilderness journey, so to speak, in learning the commands because they just want the promises. And this is where immature believers start messing up and then puffing themselves up, thinking that they are the ones who are to be given credit to rather than Elohim. And this is what Yahweh is warning us against through Moshe here. Because if we conveniently forget the wilderness, which a lot of people today have done, and teach others to do likewise, that's when pride has a way of setting in a very big way. To not remember what Yahweh has done, we spoke remember to remember in the last chapter. When you don't remember what Yahweh has done, when you forget to remember, rebellion and pride will be the resulting fruit that will come forth. And that's not good fruit. These are the very things that our fathers did, not remembering, and they caused us to walk in sin and lawlessness. We have a responsibility to the next generation to cause them to remember what Yahweh has done. Tehillah 106 verse 6 to 7 says, we have sinned with our fathers, we have acted perversely, we have done wrong. Our fathers in Mitzrayim did not understand your wonders. They did not remember your kindness, but rebelled by the sea of reeds. Pride is what causes many people not to seek Elohim. And we find many people today who are not seeking his kingdom and his righteousness. And because of that, they're not actually getting filled. That's why they're seeking every other thing they can, hoping to get some kind of fill, but they'll never get satisfied. Tehillah 10 verse 4 says, in the pride of his face, the wrongdoer does not seek him. In all his thoughts, there is no Elohim. Because a wrongdoer is just simply consumed with what he wants, his way. Now, Yahweh brings us into the wilderness to prove us. The reason we have a journey in the word as we are sojourning here is that Yahweh can prove us, refine us, to test us, to see if we're actually worthy to be a bride that can dwell with him forever. You know, we're told in Tehillah 12, the words of Yahweh are clean words, silver tried in a furnace of earth, tried 7 times, or refined 7 times. You know, Tehillah 66 verse 10 says, you, O Elohim, have proved us. You have refined us as silver is refined. Because if we're not spending time allowing the word to refine us, how can we really be proved or proven as a bride that is worthy to be with our master forever? Our master says in Zechariah 13 verse 9, I shall bring the third into fire and refine them as silver is refined and try them as gold is tried. Then they shall call on my name, and I shall answer them, and I shall say, this is my people, while they say, Yahweh is my Elohim. It's through his proving us and trying us that we remember what he's done, and we learn to call upon his name. And we recognize that we are clearly identified as his own, that we are the beloveds, and the beloved is ours. You know, he proves us to see what's on our hearts. You know, a refining pot is for silver and a furnace for gold, but Yahweh tries the hearts. Mishle 17 verse 3. Kepha reminds us in 1 Peter 1 verse 7, in order that proving of your belief, much more precious than gold that perishes and proven by fire, might be found to result in praise and respect and esteem at the revelation of Yeshua Messiah. Yaakov reminds us to count it all joy when we fall into various trials, knowing that the proving of our belief works endurance, and let endurance have a perfect work so that you be perfect and complete, lacking naught. So many allow the pride of life to cause them to avoid any form of proving because they don't like it. And in the process, they'll come up with things resistant to the proper proving of the word over their lives. They'll say things like, oh, but he knows my heart. Whenever you hear anybody say that, you must already know there's a wall of defense not wanting to obey. What most people realize is what they're saying is 100% true. Yahweh certainly does know all of our hearts. We can't see the hearts, Yahweh can. And to see a clear witness, you know, the following verse is a wonderful answer to all those who say, oh, but he knows my heart. Yirmiyahu 17 verse 9 to 10 says, the heart is crooked above all and desperately sick. Who knows it? Who shall know it? I, Yahweh, search the heart. I try the kidneys. I give every man according to his ways, according to the fruit of his deeds. You know, to the lawless who claim that the Torah is no longer applicable, to all those who think this, you are 100% correct in saying Yahweh knows your heart. And that being the case, an urgent consideration should be received by those who claim such nonsense to recognize the complication or the implication of the clear fact that Yahweh certainly does know your heart. And because that, we should be looking intently into the mirror of the word so that we should know how we are to be looking. Not just saying, oh, he knows my heart, and excuse away the need to be proven and tried by Yahweh so that we can be brought forth as a refined, perfect bride. You know, it's sad to see so many people being stubborn and filled with pride, saying we don't need to do what the word says. You know, we are told here in verse 3, it says, Yahweh brought Israel out to a place of hunger and thirst and need, and he supplied their needs. The test would be, will they hunger and thirst for righteousness? Because our master makes it clear, if you do that, you will be filled. They were fed with manna, a food that neither they nor their fathers knew. And what we see happening in our days is the very similar thing. As we've been coming into covenant, Yahweh's delivered us from enslavement and bondage to corrupt traditions that twisted the words and taught dogmas of man rather than the word of Elohim. We too have been given food that our fathers never knew. And you know what? We're eating the good bread from heaven, the good manna. Truth is being fed to us in our wilderness sojourning, where we learn to hear the true voice of our master. We're eating today food our fathers possibly never ate. And we understand that we cannot live on bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of Yahweh. Those who claim that the Torah and the prophets are just historical writings and not necessary to learn and to study, meditate on, and to obey, they're simply being stubborn, rebellious, and rejecting the bread of life, Yeshua Messiah. You know, when our master was tempted in the wilderness, he answered. We looked at that last week. I think we're also looking again at another account of that this week based on what we're reading in Deďarim. Our master responded with the word of Elohim. And if we're not skilled in the word of Elohim, how will we be able to use the double-edged sword of our master? And as we seek to walk and obey our master daily, the promised provision and protection is there. Here's the resulting consequences of obedience. Our master promises to feed us, to nourish us. He says he's going to prove us. He says he's going to try us. He says he's going to discipline us. But when we're disciplined, it shows, as Hebrews says in Hebrews 12, you can go read that it shows that he loves us, that he's a father that loves us. And we need discipline. We should not hate instruction, casting his word behind us. We should embrace his instruction so that we can be brought forth as a refined bride. And in this chapter is again, and next chapter and the next one, it's a repetition. And it might sound, haven't we read this? Because it's a repetition and for good reason. We are to guard the commands. We are to guard the commands, guard the commands. Guard the commands and fear him. It's all about a proper fear and reverence for Yahweh. And in doing so, we are to be on guard. Guarding is one of the most frequent themes that we find in Devarim because it highlights how we are to be watchful and not ignorant of our need to obey the commands of our master. Now, we are told in verse 18, when it says here, in verse 18, you shall remember Yahweh your Elohim, for it is he who gives you the power to get wealth. In verse 17, it says, don't say in your heart, when it's going well with you, don't say in your heart, my power and the strength of my hand has made this for me. Remember, it's Yahweh who gives you the power to get wealth. And this is not a prosperity message. That many have tried to use these verses as standalone verses to promote some kind of prosperity gospel. We must remember who it is that gives us the power to get wealth. What we must realize here is this wealth is not linked simply to monetary benefits, which many are running after. The deceit of wealth chokes out the word. The Hebrew word for wealth here is chayil, which means strength, efficiency, wealth, army, ability, capability, excellence, coming from the verb chil, which means to be strong, firm, endure, and prosper. So what our master is actually saying here, I give you the strength to endure. And in our enduring, sometimes in our endurance, we see the reward for our endurance, and Yahweh blesses us with provision. And when that provision comes forth, we shouldn't say, oh, look at what a good job I've done. Yes, you should be doing the good job, but you don't sit back and give yourself certificates of praise. You continue serving and remembering it's Yahweh who gives you the strength to endure and have a spirit of excellence. The Hebrew word for power, kuach, means strength, power, ability, and might. And it really speaks of, you know, when Shaul says, I have strength to do all in Messiah, who empowers me, he's bringing us back to Torah. Don't forget who gives you the strength to empower you to endure. And remember, Shaul said this to us when he was in prison. And he said he'd learned to be content in all matters. So it wasn't about the physical circumstances that he was writing about. He was writing that whether his physical circumstances were great or whether they weren't so great, Yahweh gives them the ability to get through it all. And when we understand this in a greater context, Mishle 24 verse 5 says, mighty is the wise in strength, and a man of knowledge strengthens power. So as we grow in the knowledge of Elohim, which Shaul prays for us in Ephesians 1, that we will grow in the knowledge of Elohim so that we find ourselves not lacking any good matter because we have all that we need for life and reverence in the Master. That's when we can face any consequence any consequence that we might be in with confidence and joy in the Master, not neglecting our duty to seek righteousness, seek wisdom, get understanding, and be obedient, but doing it with joy, knowing that as we obey our Master, he'll equip us. No matter how hard we work, what we have been given by Yahweh, and he makes it possible. It's not about materialism. That's not what Yahweh is saying. And that's actually what Yahweh was warning against. When you see things are going well, don't forget Yahweh. And isn't that what some of the sovereigns did? That's what Israel did. They quickly forgot Yahweh. In verse 19 to 20, we are told, follow other mighty ones and you'll perish. People are following or serving their bank accounts today. They're following traditions. They're following social and sporting events or their possessions. Anything other than Yahweh, people are following today. And we've been warned, serve any other and you're going to perish. It's a dying you will die. You're not maybe going to die instantly like Hananiah and Shapira did in Acts 5, but you're going to decay away. Let's go on to the next chapter. Chapter 9. I need to increase my screen's brightness here. There we go. Chapter 9.
Hear, O Israel, you are passing over the Jordan today to go into dispossessed nations greater and stronger than yourselves, cities great and walled up to the heavens, a people great and tall, the descendants of the Anakim, whom you know, and of whom you have heard it said, who does stand before the descendants of Anak? And you shall know today that Yahweh your Elohim is he who is passing over before you as a consuming fire. He does destroy them and subdue them before you. So you shall dispossess them and destroy them quickly, as Yahweh has said to you. Do not think in your heart, after Yahweh your Elohim has driven them out before you, saying, because of my righteousness Yahweh has brought me in to possess this land. But it is because of the wrong of these nations that Yahweh is driving them out from before you. It is not because of your righteousness or the uprightness of your heart that you go in to possess their land, but because of the wrong of these nations that Yahweh your Elohim drives them out from before you, in order to establish the word which Yahweh swore to your fathers, to Abraham, to Yitzchak, and to Yaakov. And you shall know that Yahweh your Elohim is not giving you this good land to possess because of your righteousness, for you are a stiff-necked people. Remember, do not forget how you provoked to wrath Yahweh your Elohim in the wilderness. From the day that you came out of the land of Mitzrayim until you came to this place, you have been rebellious against Yahweh. Even in Horeb you made Yahweh wroth, so that Yahweh was enraged with you to destroy you. When I went up into the mountain to receive the tablets of stone, the tablets of the covenant which Yahweh made with you, then I stayed on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. I did not eat bread, nor did I drink water. Then Yahweh gave me the 2 tablets of stone, written with the finger of Elohim, and on them were all the words which Yahweh had spoken to you in the mountain from the midst of the fire in the day of the assembly. And it came to be at the end of 40 days and 40 nights that Yahweh gave me the 2 tablets of stone, the tablets of the covenant. Then Yahweh said to me, Arise, go down quickly from here, for your people whom you brought out of Mitzrayim have acted corruptly. They have quickly turned aside from the way which I commanded them. They have made themselves a molded image. And Yahweh spoke to me, saying, I have seen this people, and look, they are a stiff-necked people. Leave me alone, so that I destroy them, and blot out their name from under the heavens, and make of you a nation stronger and greater than they. So I turned and came down from the mountain, and the mountain burned with fire, and the 2 tablets of the covenant were in my 2 hands. And I looked and saw that you had sinned against Yahweh your Elohim, and had made for yourselves a molded calf. You had quickly turned aside from the way which Yahweh had commanded you. And I took the 2 tablets and threw them out of my 2 hands, and broke them before your eyes. And I fell down before Yahweh as at the first, 40 days and 40 nights. I did not eat bread and I did not drink water, because of all your sins which you committed in doing evil in the eyes of Yahweh to provoke him. For I was afraid of the displeasure and rage with which Yahweh was wroth with you to destroy you. But Yahweh listened to me that time once more. And Yahweh was very enraged with Aharon to destroy him. So I prayed for Aharon at that time also. And I took your sin, the calf which you had made, and burned it with fire, and crushed it, and ground it very small, until it was as fine as dust. And I threw its dust into the stream that came down from the mountain. And at Tavera, and at Massa, and at Kivroth Hata'ava, you made Yahweh wroth. And when Yahweh sent you from Kadesh Barnea, saying, Go up and possess the land which I have given you, then you rebelled against the mouth of Yahweh your Elohim, and you neither trusted him nor listened to his voice. You have been rebellious against Yahweh from the day that I knew you. So I fell down before Yahweh the 40 days and 40 nights, for I fell down because Yahweh has said he would destroy you. And I prayed to Yahweh and said, O Master Yahweh, do not destroy your people and your inheritance, whom you have ransomed in your greatness, whom you have brought out of Mitzrayim with a strong hand. Remember your servants Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Do not look on the stubbornness of this people, or on their wrong, or on their sin, lest the land from which you brought us should say, because Yahweh was not able to bring them to the land which he promised them, and because he hated them, he has brought them out to kill them in the wilderness. And they are your people and your inheritance, whom you brought out by your great power and by your outstretched arm.
Okay, so this chapter is again a further warning against pride and the emphasis on the fact that when we experience and we walk in the joy of the blessing of righteousness and we see great victory over, unrighteousness, we must never think in our hearts that it's because of what we've done, or our own righteousness. It's because of Elohim guarding his covenant that he made with Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And we are, in verse 9 to 16, Moshe gives us a clear instruction of remember how you provoked Yahweh to wrath and how you quickly turned aside. And I think that's so important. Remember, it makes it clear that how quickly people can turn aside from being upright. And it's actually quite scary how quickly people can turn away from the truth. He gives the account of Aharon, how he built a calf, and we remember that incident. Moshe went up the mountain to get the words of Yahweh. 40 days and 40 nights, the people grew restless, and they said, where's this Moshe? What's become of him? And Aharon made this golden calf, and when he was confronted, he said, it just, I threw their gold in the fire, and this popped out, But he said to the people, here's your calf, tomorrow is a festival to Yahweh. And this was corrupt worship. When Moshe came down and saw the people playing, and Yehoshua said at the back, he said, no, this is a sound of rejoicing. And then he threw the tablets down, broke the tablets. And this is this picture of him going and then being told to make 2 new tablets and take them up to Yahweh, where Yahweh wrote again the commands. That is a great shadow picture of our master. The first tablets were from above, from Yahweh, but Moshe having to make 2 tablets in the same way, but Yahweh still be the one writing on those tablets, is a picture of Messiah coming from above, taking on the form of man to be broken for us, and being raised again, seated on high, where his word is firmly established. It's not a change in the word. It's not a change in the commands. It's an everlasting covenant that his word does not return void. And so what this teaches us, and it reminds us not to get so filled with pride. People come on the walk, they want to learn, then suddenly they think, check at me, and they turn aside. And today, many are turning aside from the pattern, because they think, why do I need to stick to this pattern? It's boring. I don't want to do the same thing over and over and over. And then they quickly turn aside and they begin to start making their own idol worship. Yahweh wanted to wipe them all out. And Moshe is a wonderful picture of Yeshua coming to be our intercessor on our behalf, standing in the gap. Moshe reminds Yahweh of his covenant. Not that Yahweh needs to be reminding, but rather we do, and Yahweh relents, because it's a lesson for us again. Because here's a clear picture of Yahweh coming in the flesh of man according to the Torah, that he does not say, okay, I gave my Torah and I'm not going to use it. No, he comes according to the very instructions that he has given. And we see here Moshe burned the calf, ground it to the ground, scattered it on the water, and made the people drink it. And this is a picture of, again, when we see in Yeshayahu in regards to the whoring of the nations, that they'd be scattered over the face of the earth, and they're going to drink of the wrath of Elohim. In fact, Yirmiyahu was told to go and make the people drink, because we realize, I spoke earlier about the cup of remembrance that we have once a year. We're all going to drink a cup. We either have the cup of remembrance once a year, and we're doing so in obedience, and we're not letting our obedience turn aside quickly in any way, because if we do, we're going to drink the cup of the wrath of Yahweh, And so we need to make sure that we are a people that are guarding covenant. When we look at the actions here that Moshe is warning them against, because remember what happened when Aharon made this calf and what Yahweh wanted to do and what I had to do and the tablets that I had to make and take up. So this is a wonderful picture of the renewed covenant reminds us not to break covenant like our fathers did. Because he found fault with them, as Hebrews said, not with the covenant, with the people administering the covenant. And so we see it's important for us to remember these events so that we don't repeat them. Sadly, people can be told the events, remember the events, and still repeat the events. A perfect picture of this is seen in Yerovam, the first sovereign of the house of Israel, the 10 tribes of Israel, the northern tribes. In 1 Kings, we can see here, in 1 Kings 12, Melachim Aleph, the sovereign took counsel, this is Yerovam, and made 2 calves of gold and said to the people, "It is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. See your mighty ones, O Israel, which brought you up from the land of Mitzrayim." And he set one up in Beit El and the other he put in Dan. How blasphemous this was. Look at these golden calves. They're the ones who brought you out of Mitzrayim. No. I've mentioned on a number of occasions that Yahweh's most frequent description in his relationship with Israel is, "I am Yahweh, your Elohim, who brought you out of the land of Mitzrayim." And Yerovam was presenting a corruption of the truth through idol worship. And when Yerovam was afraid that these 10 tribes would go to Rechavam, the son of Shlomo, and he would no longer have power, he made a way to retain his people. And what Yerovam did, he changed some feasts. So he had a feast in the 8th month, like the house of Yehuda in the 7th month. What Yehuda were following, even corruptly, was Yahweh's appointments in the 7th month. What Yerovam did is he rejected all the Levites that were designated in all the tribes and were supposed to be given land in all the allotments. But he rejected the Levitical priesthood, and he appointed whoever wanted to could come and be a 3-year student, become a priest, get black robes on them, and officiate the corrupt worship service of idol worship. Israel were more concerned about their calves than they were about pleasing Yahweh. And when we see here, in Hosea 10, Yahweh rebukes Israel for their calf worship. And we see Beit El, which was the southern city of the northern tribes. Dan was the northern city that bordered the house of Israel. Now Beit El, Yahweh calls in Hosea 10, Beit Aven. Beit Aven means house of iniquity, house of wickedness, house of vanity. And because here now, what they called what was to be Beit El, the house of El, it was no longer Yahweh's house. It was the house of iniquity. Because when you bring in a corrupted form of worship and think it's Yahweh, it's no longer Yahweh's house. So even we who are the dwelling place of Elohim, what has the dwelling place of Elohim got to do with idols? Nothing. He says in Hosea, "Ephraim, what more have you to do with idols?" Nothing. The house of El had become the house of iniquity. False worship was taking place, and it was being led by false priests who were not appointed by Yahweh. So when we look at the historical accounts of Israel, Moshe warned them, remember what Yahweh did. Remember how Aharon provoked Yahweh with his calf and how you all provoked him and what I had to go another 40 days and 40 nights. Remember what you did. Today, we can look back and say, remember what Yerovam also did, because they didn't remember. You know, when you look at these historical accounts of people who entered the promised land and didn't take heed of the words of Moshe, they'd forsaken Yahweh, they'd relied on their own might and tried to make it on their own. I think we read last week, Yirmiyahu 2, was it last week or the week before, where it says, my people have done two evils. They have forsaken me, the fountain of living waters, and to hew out for themselves cisterns, cracked cisterns, which do not hold water. Yahweh says that they were doubly guilty and they would be punished for this. In Yirmiyahu 16 verse 18, he says, at first I shall repay double for her crookedness and their sin, because they have defiled my land with dead bodies of their disgusting matters, and have filled my inheritance with their abominations. The dead bodies and the disgusting matters, they were putting children through the fire to Molech. Two evils that made them guilty, forsaking Yahweh and establishing their own ways. This is a very severe warning that we must be on guard against, forsaking Yahweh. We're going to look a little bit more about that in Yeshayahu later. And Moshe gives them a historical account, a brief historical account of their wickedness and rebellion at certain key moments at Tavera, Kivroth Hata'avah, where they rebelled against Yahweh, where Yahweh struck many people, where he sent burning on the outskirts of the camp. They were at Kadesh Barnea for a long time, where they had to learn to be set apart, but quickly turned aside. And this idea of quickly turning aside is a very dangerous thing that so many people are doing. They hear the word of Yahweh, yes, I'll do it, and quickly turn aside, maybe because of the pressures of this world, maybe because of the influence of others. Turning aside from the truth happens extremely quickly when one forgets how Yahweh gets provoked to wrath when you turn aside. Prophetim 2 verse 17 says, however, they did not listen to their rulers, this is Judges 2, but went whoring after other mighty ones and bowed down to them. They soon turned aside from the way in which their fathers walked, in obeying the commands of Yahweh. They did not do so. Shaul also, he couldn't believe, when he took the good news to those in Galatia. The letter of Galatians is written to the believers who came to the good news in Galatia, and they had turned from the truth to fall for another message. He says in Galatians 1 verse 6, I marvel, now that's not a good marveling, that you are so readily turning away from him who called you in the favor of Yeshua Messiah to a different good news. What was happening? The whole letter of Galatians is about this clear wrestle that people were having in the flesh, Yeshua being proclaimed by Shaul, the good news, receiving an immersion in his name, in getting the circumcision of the heart, and others coming along with another good news and saying you need to be physically circumcised. The whole letter of Galatians is about the physical circumcision and does not give you, in fact, getting physically circumcised causes you to deny Messiah. And he's saying, I marvel how you are quickly turning aside to another good news. And he says, if anybody brings you another good news, let him be accursed. And I say it again, he says, because he was quite angry at how people had quickly turned aside to start getting physically circumcised after he brought the good news of Messiah, who is our circumcision, and the need to be immersed in his name. Forgetting leads to pride, because people take their eyes off the truth and focus on self. There's thousands and thousands and thousands of different doctrines of man today. Why? Because of those people who have quickly turned aside from the truth. And we are to be on guard against such corruption as we remember that it was Yahweh who brought us out of corruption with his great power and his mighty outstretched arm. Chapter 10.
At that time Yahweh said to me, hew for yourself 2 tablets of stone like the first, and come up to me on the mountain, and you shall make yourself an ark of wood. Then I write on the tablets the words that were on the first tablets, which you broke, and you shall put them in the ark. So I made an ark of acacia wood, hewed 2 tablets of stone like the first, and went up the mountain with the 2 tablets in my hand. And he wrote on the tablets, according to the first writing, the 10 words, which Yahweh had spoken to you in the mountain from the midst of the fire in the day of the assembly. Then Yahweh gave them to me, And I turned and came down from the mountain and put the tablets in the ark which I had made, and they are there as Yahweh commanded me. Now the children of Israel set out from the wells of Bnei Yaakon to Mosera. Aharon died there, and he was buried there, and Eleazar his son became priest in his place. From there they set out to Gudgodah, and from Gudgodah to Yotbathah, a land of rivers and water. At that time Yahweh separated the tribe of Levi to bear the ark of the covenant of Yahweh, to stand before Yahweh, to serve him, and to bless in his name to this day. Therefore Levi has no portion nor inheritance with his brothers. Yahweh is his inheritance, as Yahweh your Elohim promised him. And I stayed in the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights, and Yahweh heard me at that time also, and Yahweh chose not to destroy you. And Yahweh said to me, Arise, go before the people to set out, and let them go in and possess the land which I swore to their fathers to give them. And now, Israel, what is Yahweh your Elohim asking of you, but to fear Yahweh your Elohim, to walk in all his ways, and to love him, and to serve Yahweh your Elohim with all your heart and with all your being, to guard the commands of Yahweh and his laws, which I command you today for your good. See, the heavens and the heaven of heavens belong to Yahweh your Elohim, also the earth with all that is in it. Yahweh delighted only in your fathers to love them, and he chose their seed after them, you above all the peoples, as it is today. And you shall circumcise the foreskins of your heart, and harden your neck no more. For Yahweh your Elohim is Elohim of mighty ones, and Master of masters, the great El, mighty and awesome, who shows no partiality, nor takes a bribe. He executes right ruling for the fatherless and the widow, and loves the stranger, giving him food and a garment. And you shall love the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Mitzrayim. Fear Yahweh your Elohim, serve him, and cling to him, and swear by his name. He is your praise, and he is your Elohim, who has done for you these great and awesome deeds, which your eyes have seen. Your fathers went down to Mitzrayim with 70 beings, and now Yahweh your Elohim has made you as numerous as the stars of the heavens.
So obviously I mentioned already Moshe making new tablets, breaking tablets, making new tablets, going up, spending another 40 days, 40 nights. Same words, new tablets, new stones. This is a picture of the renewal of the covenant. But what we see here, Moshe is giving this history. Remember how you walked? Remember what happened? He's going through this whole thing, and some of the places that they stopped at, we went through the wilderness journey, so I'm not going to go into the definitions or the lessons we can learn from every stop, like sons of twisting, Bnei Yaakon. We mustn't let the word get twisted to our own destruction. But one of the things that I see here is that right through this thing, it's about guarding. It's about clinging to Yahweh. In verse 12, what is Yahweh your Elohim asking of you? Fear Yahweh your Elohim, walk in his ways, love him, serve him with all your heart and all your being, to guard the commands of Yahweh, his laws and commands which I command you today for your good. That's what Yahweh's asking for us. And when we say yes to what he asks, then we shouldn't say, well, now I'll do what I want. We must be on guard against breaking our word of commitment to our master. It begins with the fear of Elohim. The fear, when we walk in the fear of Elohim, we begin to understand how we are to have ears to hear what we need to hear our master speaking to us. Mishlei 2 verse 3-5 says, if you cry out for discernment, lift up your voice for understanding. If you seek her as silver and search for her as hidden treasures, then you would understand the fear of Yahweh and find the knowledge of Elohim. We know that the fear of Yahweh is the beginning of wisdom. And knowledge of the set-apart one is understanding. So if people aren't really inclined to be in the word, desire the word, to love the word, to spend time in the word, they don't have a fear of Elohim, like Israel did in the days of Malachi. Despising his table, doing whatever they want, mixing their worship. Mixing worship shows no fear of Yahweh. And he's asking us firstly to put him first. It begins with the fear of Yahweh, seeking him so that we don't walk away that's in a way that's contrary to him. Because the second thing he asks of us is to walk in his ways. You won't really know what his ways are if you don't have the true reverent fear for him to seek him and seek what his ways are. And when we walk in his ways, we do what his word says. That's when he says, and to love me, because that's what our expression of love is to guard his commands. And when people say, I love Elohim, but they aren't in his word and they're not walking in his word, they are just corrupt lip service, honoring him with their lips, but their hearts are far from him, So we are to fear Yahweh, to walk in his ways, to love him, to serve him. Because everything here is actionable words, if you will. It's not just emotional responses and thought life. It is a diligent action of one's life in declaring who it is that you're serving, who it is that you are actually following, and are you guarding the word the way you should? A servant of Yahweh guards the commands, because that's what he's asking here. The book of Malachi also says, but now, Israel, what is Yahweh asking of you? Do you want to repeat that, those that know the verse? But to love Yahweh, guard his commands, and walk humbly before your Elohim, and to do right and walk humbly, and loving commitment. There you go. All of the above, because that's what it all comes down to. And there are so many people actually showing disrespect to Yahweh. And it's always been about the heart. When I talked earlier now about the circumcision, that of the heart, here we already see that you shall circumcise your hearts, because it's always about rendering our heart to Yahweh, not hardening our heart. Our circumcision of our hearts happens when we are immersed in Yeshua, which we see in Colossians. We were circumcised with a circumcision not made with hands, that putting off the body of the sin of the flesh, by the circumcision of Messiah, having been buried with him in immersion, in which you also were raised with him through the belief in the working of Elohim, who raised him from the dead, and you being dead in your trespass and the uncircumcision of your flesh, he has made alive together in him, having forgiven all trespasses. Now we must understand here, this is what people fail to understand when reading Galatians, Colossians, Romans, which primarily is dealing with the debate over physical circumcision, along with other theological points that are brought forth from that basis. Circumcision was a sign of the covenant that Abraham was given to the seed, which is Messiah. Circumcision was not an act of receiving forgiveness for trespasses, because that's what Colossians is saying here. We have now received a circumcision of our heart in Messiah's circumcision, so that in him we are now raised together in him and live, having been forgiven all our trespasses. Because you see, many people attach physical circumcision as an entrance into covenant. But Shaul is warning, when you do that, you're denying Messiah, the only one who can cleanse you and forgive you. And Devarim is very clear in the command of applying his command that's being given and carried out, as we see in the renewed writings, is that anyone who needs to be saved must be immersed to receive Messiah's circumcision. Without immersion, the foreskin of our hearts cannot be cut away by the perfect and full work of the life, death, and resurrection of Messiah. And it will only leave those who refuse to be immersed in his name being stiff-necked. Verse 17 to 20 is very clear. Fear Yahweh, serve him, cling to him, swear by his name. Again, this chapter is all about actionable words in showing who it is you serve. In verse 21, when it says, he is your praise, and then as we were reading this, and I realized that the one who will be your praise is the one that you're clinging to, the one that you're serving, the one that you're fearing. Now, if fear of man is gripping you because you succumb to their demands and break the word because man causes you to, then that's who your praise will be. Yahweh is our praise when we fear him, cling to him, serve him, and walk in his commands. Tehillah 44 verse 8 says, in Elohim we shall boast all day long and praise your name forever, Selah. This is something, It highlights not that we're walking along singing all day. I mean, it's not a bad thing to have a song going on in your mind, but, you're not so distracted by singing that you're not doing what you should be doing. But in our boasting in him all day long and praising his name, it's all about doing all unto him. Whether in word or deed, we're doing it all in the name of Yeshua Messiah. Now, we need to be recognizing that, Yahweh, the question is Yahweh your praise? He is your praise. He is your Elohim. He's done these great things for you. And the question we need to ask ourselves daily, is Yahweh our praise? And if he is, then you're going to fear him, you're going to cling to him, you're going to serve him, and you're going to swear by his name. And then swearing by his name, you're not going to do it falsely, because you're not going to misrepresent his character in you. Chapter 11. Oh, it is down. I think there's certain angles where the light comes in on my glasses, but it is down to its lowest. Oh, sorry, you wanted to ask? I thought you were talking about the light on my glasses. Yes, Jackie. Not on the chapter. Okay? Oh, sorry. Okay, Deďabarim 11.
And you shall love Yahweh your Elohim and guard his charge, even his laws and his right rulings and his commands always. And you shall know today, for it is not your children who have not known and who have not seen the discipline of Yahweh your Elohim, his greatness, his strong hand, and his outstretched arm, and his signs and his works which he had done in the midst of Mitzrayim, to Pharaoh, sovereign of Mitzrayim, and to all his land. And that which he had done to the army of Mitzrayim, to their horses and their chariots, when he made the waters of the Sea of Reeds overflow them as they pursued you, and how Yahweh has destroyed them to this day. And what he had done for you in the wilderness till you came to this place. And what he had done to Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, son of Reuben, when the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up, and their households, and their tents, and all their living creatures that were in their possession, in the midst of all Israel. For yours are the eyes that saw all the great work of Yahweh which he did. And you shall guard every command which I command you today, so that you are strong, and shall go in, and shall possess the land which you are passing over to possess, and to prolong your days in the land which Yahweh swore to give your fathers, to them and their descendants, a land flowing with milk and honey. For the land which you are going in to possess is not like the land of Mizraim from which you have come, where you sowed your seed and watered it by foot, as a vegetable garden. But the land which you are passing over to possess is a land of hills and valleys, which drink water from the rain of the heavens. A land which Yahweh your Elohim looks after. The eyes of Yahweh your Elohim are always on it, from the beginning of the year to the latter end of the year. And it shall be that if you diligently obey my commands, which I command you today, to love Yahweh your Elohim, and to serve him with all your heart and with all your being, then I shall give you the rain of your land in its season, the early rain and the latter rain, and you shall gather in your grain, and your new wine, and your oil. And I shall give grass in your fields for your livestock, and you shall eat and be satisfied. Guard yourselves, lest your heart be deceived, and you turn aside and serve other mighty ones and bow down to them. Then the displeasure of Yahweh shall burn against you, and he shall shut up the heavens, and there be no rain, and the land not give its increase. And you shall perish quickly from the good land which Yahweh is giving you. And you shall lay up these words of mine in your heart and in your being, and shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. And you shall teach them to your children, speaking of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up. And shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates, so that your days and the days of your children are increased on the soil which Yahweh swore to your which Yahweh swore to your fathers to give them, as the days of the heavens on the earth. For if you diligently guard all these commands which I command you to do it, to love Yahweh your Elohim, to walk in all his ways, and to cling to him, then Yahweh shall drive out all these nations before you, and you shall dispossess greater and stronger nations than you. Every place on which the sole of your foot treads is yours. From the wilderness and Lebanon, from the river Euphrates, even to the western sea is your border. No man shall stand against you. Yahweh your Elohim shall put the dread of you and the fear of you upon all the land where you tread, as he has spoken to you.
Okay, so we continue to see a clear thread through all of these chapters that Moshe is continually reminding us that we are not to forsake for any moment, not a fleeting moment, our need to be loving Elohim, guarding his commands, clinging to him, serving him, and just, it really comes down to, do I love Yahweh or not? To love is to obey. And already we see obedience entails a diligent guarding of what's been instructed in order to do it. We are to guard his charge. Now, the Hebrew word for charge, mishmereth, means to guard or watch or guard duty or guard post. It's the feminine of mishmar, which means a place of confinement or jail or prison guard or observance, coming from the word shamar, which is to guard. Now, what we see here is that this noun, the charge of Yahweh, it's basically, a noun is used in two principles. One is in obligation or a service to be performed. The second is to do with something that is to be kept or preserved. So there's a preserving of what needs to be preserved, but there's an obligation to be doing what needs to be done. And we have an obligation to perform the service that we as a set apart and treasured possession of our master are to be doing, and that is to hear God and do the very commands that Yahweh. Eqeď 44 verse 16 says of Yahweh, it says, they shall enter my set apart place, they shall draw near to my table to serve me, and they shall guard my charge. In other words, drawing near to Yahweh and doing service is not how you see fit, but it's always with the obligation that the service that's prescribed is done in the necessary manner. I just want to correct myself before when we went into a couple of seconds silent mode. I said earlier about what does Yahweh ask of us, and I mentioned Malachi instead of Micha. Okay, Malachi is about when they despised Yahweh and his table. Micha is the one that says, what is Yahweh asking of us? Okay, so I just wanted to correct. Thank you for that. Okay, so we guard his charge. So there's an obligation for service that must be performed. We guard his laws. These are his prescribed ordinances that we cannot deviate or twist or change. We need to recognize the Hebrew word for laws, chukah, speaks of something that's clearly been inscribed, cut in stone, so to speak. Tehillah 119 verse 16 says, I delight myself in your laws, I do not forget your word. We are to guard and we are to love and guard his right rulings. So it doesn't just stop with what's prescribed. The right rulings are also prescribed, but the right rulings, coming from the word mishpat or mishpatim, which is actually one of the names of one of the Torah portions that we go through, it really speaks about ordinances and regulations. So we have the clear instructions that are set in stone by Yahweh, and from that we get expanded into how we deal with each other, how we approach, how we serve, and how we operate, It really speaks about the laws, the regulations, how we regulate our obedience according to Yahweh's specific standards. There's only one who gives us a law to live by. There's only one judge who we submit under. There's only one lawgiver, one sovereign who saves us. And therefore, guarding his right rulings is a necessity, because righteousness and right rulings are the foundation of the throne of Elohim. It's what his throne of authority is seated upon. We are to guard his commands, which are his mitzvot, which means the commandments, obligations, or precepts. So his charge, his laws, his right rulings, his commands are things that we are to guard at all times. Now, the Hebrew word for always is kol hayamim, because it's entire. Kol is entire, all or whole, continually, and yom is day or time. So every single day, always, we guard his word. That's what it comes down to. In other words, we don't for a moment strip off our need to be guarding, which means we are constantly in service, because our master is constantly interceding for us in the heavens. So there isn't a moment when we are not on duty. And so that comes down to throwing out the idea of people saying, no, well, I'm not on duty now, so I can, ... think that they can kind of lessen their necessity to be on guard, as in a picture of a guard that we get that Shaul uses in many of his letters. Verse 2 to 7 makes it clear that the Torah is for us today, because it's for us who are alive today. And we remember what he's done for us, and as well as remembering what provokes Yahweh to wrath. We must know, a lot of people don't ever want to hear the things that angers Yahweh. Because, oh no, that's too hard to hear. We don't want to hear how cruel and all that. We must remember what he's done for us. And we must remember what provokes him to anger, to wrath. Why? So that we don't do that. We are to guard the commands so that we are strong and able to possess the land. Be strong and courageous is a continual theme that we see. The word for strong, chazak, we've spoken about many a time, about holding fast, taking a firm hold of, grasping between the ears so that you can actually be firm on a matter and how to handle it. Now, the Hebrew word chazak is actually also translated as hold fast. When Eqeď says, my righteousness I hold fast, I do not let it go. My heart does not reproach me as long as I live. Here was a confession of a man saying, I have not dropped my guard. And then Moshe continues to relay the journey in the wilderness and tell them about when you go into Canaan, this land that Yahweh's promised. It's more, we need to realize that you need to rely on Yahweh's blessing you so that this land produces. It's a land of hills and valleys. And Yahweh will send the early rain, the latter rain, as long as you obey him. And then when you obey him and the rains come, there'll be harvests for you to produce in order to present to him in thanksgiving. You'll be able to succeed. You'll be able to prosper. If we guard his commands, he sends the early and the latter rains. The early and the latter rains are also wonderful pictures of a pattern that Yahweh shows of he himself coming as the early and the latter rain. One is the teacher, the other to come and gather the harvest. So we have to remind ourselves that in guarding his commands, there is great reward. And in understanding that he is likened to the teacher of righteousness, the former rain and the latter rain, coming as a teacher to show us the way so that we can have the nourishment of his word, the necessary rains falling on us as tender rain on plants, so that we can bring forth the proper works of righteousness that's able to be presented to him when he comes again in the latter rain, speaking of the harvest time at the end of the year. The danger of not guarding his commands is being deceived into following other mighty ones. Those who do not receive a love for the truth will be handed over to the delusion in order for them to believe the lie. Joel warns about this to us in his second letter to the believers in Thessalonica, which says, the coming of the lawless one is according to the working of Satan with all power and signs and wonders of falsehood, and with all deceit of unrighteousness in those perishing, because they did not receive the love for the truth in order for them to be saved. And for this reason, Elohim sends them a working of delusion for them to believe the falsehood, in order that all should be judged who did not believe the truth, but have delighted in the unrighteousness. Our master is the way, the truth, and the life. He says his Torah is truth. We also understand when we know righteousness is for us to guard the commands, unrighteousness is to disobey the commands, to neglect the commands. Now, those who didn't receive a love for the truth, love for Yahweh, by this we know that we love him when we guard his commands. And those that don't receive a love for the truth in order for them to be saved. So yes, here's a nice verse which shows we obey the commands to be saved. Because he saved us by favor. It's not by our own works that we've been saved, but his working of righteousness that's given us access into covenant. And because we've been saved, we now receive a love for the truth to guard the commands to make sure our deliverance will be made complete. So yes, obedience saves you. It retains and maintains your deliverance, your salvation that you are working out. So yes, when people say, oh, you're just trying to obey the commands to be saved, I say 100%. Because those who do not receive a love for the truth, which is to obey the commands, in order for them to be saved, then it shows us a clear standard here. If you don't obey, you will not be saved. This is a very sobering verse. There are many people who have come in another name other than Messiah, Yeshua Messiah, Yahweh our Savior, and they're following that one. And it's come in the form of corruption of titles and names that don't esteem the true name, the only name of the one who causes us to be Yahweh, our Savior. The Torah is to be on our heart. It's to be in our beings. It must define who we are led by. And when we see that, when he says these commands that they will be as signs, as frontlets between your eyes, this is a wonderful text, because in Shemot 13, we are told that the guarding of Pesach and Matzot will be as a sign on our hand and as frontlets between our eyes. We are also told that the guarding of the commands will be a sign on our hand and forehead. So when we look at Chazon and the mark of the beast, either on hand or forehead, again, here's the resulting consequence of the choices that one makes. When one chooses to obey Yahweh and takes his choosing for us, we relinquish all further choice and we submit to obeying, so that we guard the command, so that we are marked on our hand, which is what we do, and as frontlets between our eyes, because we cognitively choose him in everything that we do, serving him completely and never taking off our garments of righteousness. Or we choose to do our own thing and not choose to obey Yahweh, and then we take the mark of the beast. So if you decide you don't need to keep Sabbath this week because you need to work, you're taking the mark of the beast. If you choose to not obey Yahweh's pattern and word, and you think you keep the Sabbath, but you're choosing it another way, you're also cognitively submitting to another pattern, which means you are at risk of taking the mark of the beast. If you choose another day is better for you than Shabbat, you're taking the mark of the beast. So we need to realize that Moshe gives us clear witness 3 or 4 occasions in the Torah what marks our hand and foreheads. And it comes down to obedience, to his commands, to the guarding of his feasts, the keeping of the Sabbath, his dietary laws, guarding his charge, loving him, clinging to him, serving him. And so we see here a clear witness that, when Shlomo tells us that we must not let loving commitment forsake us, we must bind it around our neck. This is all about remaining firmly in obedience to the Master, serving him, loving him, fearing him, clinging him. This is a summary of everything that Moshe is pleading and instructing this generation that's not going to have him physically with them, but they're going to have his words of instruction. Don't forget them, I'll highlight again, as I did last week, just because it's nice to be reminded. When we walk about, when we have his commands and guarding of his commands, when we walk about his Torah, when we lie down, when we get up, it speaks of our entire life that we are to be in our Master. When we walk about, the Torah leads us. So it should be a lamp for our path, a light for our path, a lamp for our feet. Thank you. The Torah leads us. Well, it should lead us. So those who are leading you in Messiah, if they're not leading you according to the Torah, then be on guard. They're leading you away from the Torah. And Yahweh said he sends them to test you, to see if his Torah is in your heart. We're still going to get to that in Devarim. When you lie down, the Torah guards you. We can sleep peacefully knowing that when we guard the command, because of that, we have the protection of covenant. Started today about the because effect. When you have woken up, the Torah talks to you. You see, his word is living, active, sharper than any double-edged sword. And his word is how he speaks to us. How well it speaks to us depends on how well we know him. And how well we know him is defined how well we obey him. How well we are loving him. And so the good man brings forth what is good out of the good treasure of his heart. So what are you feeding your heart? The soil of your heart. Are you putting the word in? Are you nurturing that soil, keeping the weeds out so it brings about a bountiful harvest? When we think of the joy that the Torah is for us and what it, Tehillah 119 celebrates. The psalmist, I believe Ezra wrote that. It's a reflection of coming back from exile, back into the rebuilding of the temple and the walls and getting service unto Yahweh established again. And the celebration of how the Torah is what guards, protects, and instructs us in righteousness so that we can experience the full benefit of Yahweh's love, compassion, favor, loving commitment, his joy, his strength over us. And when we love the Torah so much, we'll clearly obey, wearing tzitzit as we should, writing the commands on the doorposts of our homes, not just because we're told to do so, which you do because you're told to do so, but because we want to be reminded in our going out and our coming in of the word of Yahweh, that it's a constant meditation on our hearts and on our minds, you know. It reminds us who the door is and who's continually knocking at the door of our heart. And in the closing of this, well, in verse 22 and 23, there's a conditional clause. If, then. The if is in verse 22, the then is in verse 23. If you diligently guard all these commands which I've commanded you, to love Yahweh your Elohim, to walk in his ways and cling to him, then Yahweh shall drive out all these nations before you, and you shall dispossess greater and stronger nations than you. And every place on which the sole of your foot treads is yours. You know, wherever we are ambassadors of the kingdom. And wherever we find our feet standing, we have authority to operate in obedience to Yahweh as a representation of the kingdom that is coming. What we see from this Torah portion is the reward or result of obedience, which is simply this: Yahweh will guard you with his covenant and loving commitment. Now, isn't that something to celebrate and to make sure that we don't want to be without? Amen? This Torah portion might have sounded like a continual repetition of what we are to be doing, and it is, because it's needed. Any thoughts on this Torah portion? Any comments? Anybody would like to share anything before we break for lunch?
I just go, he stresses so much, it's for your own good.
Yes.
I mean, because when you were saying, he leads us through the wilderness to test stuff, see what's in our hearts. I mean, you can proclaim to love someone while he's doing you good. And it's easy, you know what I mean? But when times are a little tougher, you still proclaim that same love, or you're starting to look for reasons or complaints or, escape routes. But because it's only in those tough times when it comes through, if you really love someone. But the way he stresses the whole time, it's for your own good.
Yeah. And Yahweh wants to bless us.
Yeah.
And he is an Elohim that sticks very clear to his word. He says, I've said it before you. I want you to benefit from it. This is how you can benefit. This is how you will not benefit. So it's not like he's given us a choice. And he wants us to make the right choice. That's what it continually comes down to. And that choice is an every single day, every single moment choice, Because which side of the reward are you on? And this is something we must remind ourselves every day that we have. Our reward is in the heavens, and we get to taste and see that reward in everything that we do, say, and think right here, right now, as we do all in his name, with an expectation that continually grows and is getting brighter and brighter, and the excitement for his return should be causing us to actually, this driving out little by little so that you can handle things, is as we grow in maturity, we don't neglect the urgency of guarding, we actually perfect it. Because we serve a wonderful Elohim. Because, as we were saying earlier, because Elohim loving us, because we hear and guard and do. This is the reward that we have as an assurance that he will not break his covenant with us. How awesome is that? Okay, so we're going to have a little earlier lunch, extra 10 minutes or so. Then we'll come back at 2:00. Let's pray. Master Yahweh, we bless and praise you, and we thank you that we can sit here and receive encouragement and instruction through your word again. And as Colleen was saying, because it's for our good. And if we can just recognize how good your word is for us, that we can truly be reminded what a joy it is to hear these words over and over and over again, so that we make sure that everywhere our feet are treading, that it's been done in obedience, to experience the joy, the privilege, and the gift of the blessing of your word that leads us, guides us, guards us, protects us, nourishes us, and strengthens us to let you be our continual praise, for which we esteem you and give you all praise in the unity of your Spirit. We thank you that we can celebrate this joy and thanksgiving that we have through a meal together, your provision that has caused us to be able to sit here in your truth, eat of the heavenly manna that you've given us, and also to partake in a meal together in each home that's knit together, done so by your perfect design. I pray that you bless every single table that is meeting before your face today. And we give you thanks for giving us all that we need to serve you and for blessing us with food that we can be sustained to keep serving you. In the name of Yeshua, our Messiah. Amen and amen.